Hi, I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. If you're a fan of history, then you probably know what D-Day was, the Allied invasion of German-occupied France on the Normandy beaches in June of 1944. But many people don't know that D-Day was actually intended to coincide with another invasion of southern France in what was called Operation Anvil. And because of various problems, largely because the war wasn't progressing as quickly as we thought it would in Italy, that operation had to be put off until August of 1944. But in August of 1944, there was essentially a second D-Day called Operation Dragoon that involved more than 500,000 Allied troops. And it is nearly forgotten next to the larger D-Day invasions. And that's too bad, because it was really a very successful operation. Operation Dragoon liberated southern France, captured or killed more than 150,000 German troops, and most importantly, opened up the French ports of Marseille and Toulouse for Allied supply, all in a period of just about 4 weeks for a loss of about 20,000 Allied casualties. And like Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, Operation Dragoon had a number of interesting stories that could be told, but one really stands out, not just because it represents an operation that really changed the nature of warfare, but because the person at the center of that operation was a very famous person who had starred in more than 50 major Hollywood films. Lots of movie stars saw service in the Second World War, but few saw service as interesting as that of movie star Douglas Fairbanks Jr. And it is a story that deserves to be remembered. Douglas Fairbanks is one of the first true movie icons, starring in adventure roles in the silent films period, playing characters like Zorro, Robin Hood, and Don Juan. He was so famous in the silent film era that he was often called the King of Hollywood, and hosted the first Academy Awards in 1929. Douglas Fairbanks married his first wife, Anna Beth Sully, in 1907, and in 1909 they had a son, whom they also named Douglas. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. would be his father's only child from his first marriage. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. got his first film contract with Paramount Pictures at the age of 14, largely due to his father's famous name. He went into motion pictures against his father's wishes, later explaining that, "I did it for the money. When my parents separated, it was hardly amicable, and Mother and I needed to eat. Movie companies were willing to exploit my famous name. I didn't really understand that at the time." His first film role was in the movie Stephen Steps Out in 1923. He played many successful roles in the latter part of the silent film period, starring alongside stars like Greta Garbo and John Gilbert, and briefly marrying fellow movie star Joan Crawford. Unlike his father, he successfully made the transition to talkies, and starred in a slew of successful films, both in romantic comedies and swashbuckling adventure roles, with his biggest hit co-starring with Cary Grant and Victor McLaglen in Gunga Din in 1939. As war loomed on the horizon, he enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserve in 1940, alongside fellow movie star Robert Montgomery. He was commissioned a lieutenant, junior grade, in the U.S. Navy Reserve in 1940. In an interview in 1993, he said, "My theatrical career was fairly flourishing at the time, but I wanted to go into the reserves and take on Adolf Hitler." Many stars served in the military in the Second World War, with some fighting in combat. Actor Jimmy Stewart commanded a bomber squadron flying combat missions for the U.S. Army Air Force, and eventually made the rank of Brigadier General in the Air Force Reserve. Actor Clark Gable likewise flew combat missions with the Army Air Force. But Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was one of the few who chose to keep a low profile and not to seek special treatment due to his fame. He served aboard a number of Navy ships, including the battleship USS Washington, heavy cruiser USS Wichita, and aircraft carrier USS Wasp, seeing combat in the North Atlantic against German U-boats. In 1942, he was given a temporary duty assignment in England with the Combined Operations Commando Headquarters under Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten. This was the sort of temporary duty exchange where an Allied officer is expected to observe Allied training and tactics. But Fairbanks decided that he would go through full commando training and ended up participating in a number of cross-channel commando raids. There he developed an appreciation for the military art of deception. When his duty assignment returned him to the United States, the brash lieutenant made a pitch to his commanding officer, Admiral Kent Hewitt, and then to Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Ernest Young, to create a U.S. naval unit specializing in tactical cover, diversionary, and deception operations. His idea would come to life as the U.S. Navy Beach Jumpers program. Authorized in 1943, the program called for the recruitment of 180 officers and 300 men who had met 4 basic requirements: no seasickness, experience handling small boats, enough understanding of electronics to fix a home radio, and a basic understanding of celestial navigation. The Navy advertised, "We are seeking volunteers for prolonged, hazardous, distant duty for a secret project." The beach jumpers were assigned 63-foot air-sea rescue boats, each with a crew of 1 officer and 6 crew. The small plywood-hulled boats were armed with twin 50-caliber machine guns, rocket tubes, and electronics deception equipment and gear. The beach jumpers' job was to confuse the enemy into thinking that an amphibious landing was coming far away from where the real landing was going to be. Using smoke, projected sound, rocket attacks, and balloons that gave a radar signature that looked like much larger ships, the beach jumpers with just a few small boats could convince the enemy that they were facing a full-scale invasion. First used in the invasion of Sicily in 1943, the beach jumpers sowed so much confusion among the enemy that the real landing accomplished almost complete surprise. While he was not senior enough officer to actually command the beach jumpers program, Fairbanks was given command roles that had him involved in nearly every layer of training and planning for beach jumper operations. He earned a Silver Star for leading a group of beach jumpers in the invasion of Italy. For Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France in 1944, Fairbanks was given command of a beach jumpers unit assigned to simulate an invasion in the area of Nice-Cannes, 100 kilometers from the actual landing. It was during that operation that the largest naval engagement of Operation Dragoon occurred, when one of Fairbanks' small boats accidentally ran into 2 much larger and more heavily armed German corvettes. Fairbanks rushed in the rest of his small boats and, deftly using their rockets, managed to sink both corvettes, and then to direct the operation to rescue their crews. For the action, Fairbanks was awarded the Legion of Merit, and the beach jumpers were awarded a Presidential Unit Citation. Their efforts were considered to be instrumental in the success of Operation Dragoon. The beach jumpers continued their operations throughout the Second World War in both the Mediterranean and in the Pacific, where they performed another important diversionary operation during the Battle of Luzon in 1945. They were deactivated after the Second World War, but were reactivated again for both the Korean conflict and the Vietnam War, where they also engaged in PSYOPs, or psychological operations. One of the beach jumper units in Vietnam was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation. While their role has changed over time, they still exist today as the Navy's Fleet Tactical Deception Group. There are a number of stories for how they got the name beach jumpers, including one that said that it was a play on the word bejeebus because they were supposed to scare the bejeebus out of the enemy. But in 1993, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. put an end to that speculation and said that it was just a cover name that Lord Mountbatten made up. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. continued to serve throughout the war and was in fact planning beach jumper operations to support the planned British invasion of Singapore when the war ended. He continued to serve in the Naval Reserve and retired as a full captain in 1954. In 1993, he wrote a memoir about his experiences in the Second World War called A Hell of a War. After the war, he tried to revive his film career, and he played Sinbad opposite Maureen O'Hara, but he never quite achieved the same level of success that he had before the war. Still, he continued to perform on stage, on television, and in movies, and his last full-length feature role was in the movie Ghost Story in 1981. He passed away in the year 2000 at the age of 90. And despite a life that had earned him so much fame that he had not one but 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, in 1993, when he was asked how he ranked his military career in the context of his extraordinary life, his answer was, very high indeed. I'm the History Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button that there's on your left. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest some other topics for the History Guy, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 minutes more of forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.